You think redneck cooking is just roadkill and beer? Think again. These rural kitchens served up some of the most ingenious, resourceful meals in American history. We're talking dishes that turned scarcity into abundance, made every part of the animal count, and fed working families across backwoods America. Let's dig into 25 redneck recipes that prove country folks knew more about survival cooking than most of us will ever learn. Number 1. Cooter Pie. Cooter pie wasn't just turtle soup in disguise. It was an art form. The turtle meat got cooked down for hours with onions until it fell apart tender, then mixed with thick, peppery gravy. Packed into pie crusts and baked until golden, each slice revealed chunks of dark meat swimming in that rich, savory filling. The turtle tasted like the river itself, earthy, slightly wild, with a texture somewhere between chicken and pork. The slow cooking mellowed any gamey notes, leaving behind meat so tender it practically dissolved on your tongue. Served hot with the gravy soaking into that flaky crust, this was poverty food that tasted like a feast. Number 2. Demolition, derby dogs. On car hoods during demolition derbies weren't just a gimmick. They were accidentally genius. Wrapped tight in foil and subjected to violent crashes for 3 heats, the dogs got smashed, rotated, and cooked by pure impact and engine heat. The result was hot dogs with crispy, caramelized exteriors where the foil pressed into the meat, smoky from the engine oil vapors, and tender from the sustained heat. Each bite had texture, crispy edges giving way to that snappy center. The violence of the crashes had tenderized them better than any grill could. They tasted like stadium hot dogs met backyard barbecue, with that indefinable something that came from being cooked in the most ridiculous way possible. Number 3. Deer Camp Garbage Plate. The garbage plate lived up to its name but tasted like heaven. Leftover hash browns got crispy on the bottom of that massive cast iron skillet. Yesterday's venison sausage added its gamey richness. Eggs scrambled right into everything, coating each potato chunk. Baked beans brought sweetness and moisture. Questionable bacon added smoke and salt. All of it cooked together until the flavors merged into one glorious mess. The hash browns absorbed the sausage grease. The eggs held everything together. The beans caramelized on the hot skillet bottom. Every bite was different. Sometimes potato heavy, sometimes more egg, always satisfying. This was the kind of meal that stuck to your ribs for a full day of hunting. Number 4. Moonshine runners. Chili. Engine block chili wasn't just cooked on an engine, it was transformed by it. The cast iron pot secured to that screaming hot block during mountain runs created conditions no stove could replicate. Sustained high heat, constant vibration, and the occasional violent jostling broke down the meat fibers and beans in ways that made them incredibly tender. The chili absorbed subtle flavors from engine heat, a slight metallic tang, a hint of smoke from burning oil. The beans turned creamy, almost dissolving into the broth. The meat fell apart into strings. After a 45-minute chase, that chili tasted like it had simmered for 8 hours. Dark, rich, with a depth of flavor that made you forget it was cooked in the most illegal way possible. Number 5. Sweet Hush Puppies. Sweet Hush Puppies changed everything. That sugar in the cornmeal batter created a golden crust that caramelized beautifully in hot oil. Each bite was a contrast, crispy, sweet exterior, giving way to tender, slightly savory interior studded with onions. The sweetness wasn't overwhelming, just enough to make your taste buds wake up and pay attention. Traditional savory hush puppies were all onion bite and black pepper, with that pure corn flavor shining through. Both versions were right. The sweet ones tasted like dessert, masquerading as a side dish. The savory ones tasted like fried cornbread perfection. Served hot from the fryer with that slightly greasy exterior, both could make you forget about the fish entirely. Number 6. Roadkill Venison Roast. Properly prepared roadkill venison was indistinguishable from hunted deer, sometimes better. The key was immediate field dressing and that slow cook with apples and onions that broke down any toughness. The meat turned dark and tender, falling apart at the touch of a fork. Those apples cooked down into a sweet tart sauce that cut through the venison's richness. The onions added depth and slight sweetness. After 8 hours, the meat had absorbed all those flavors while staying incredibly moist. It tasted wild but refined, gamey but balanced, with that distinctive venison flavor that's richer than beef and more complex than pork. The texture was like pot roast, but more interesting, with a slight chew that reminded you this animal had been running through the woods. Number 7. Rattlesnake Chili. Rattlesnake meat in chili was a revelation if you could get past the idea. The snake meat was firm and white, with a texture like the best white fish you've ever had, but meatier. It didn't flake. It pulled apart in tender strings. Mixed into chili with beans and tomatoes, it absorbed the spices while adding its own subtle flavor. There was a sweetness to rattlesnake that chicken doesn't have, a delicate flavor that made you pay attention. The meat stayed tender through hours of simmering, never getting tough or rubbery. Each spoonful had that surprise. This isn't chicken, this is something better. The texture was more interesting, the flavor more complex, with a slight earthiness that reminded you where it came from. Number 8. Tail-Gator Gumbo. Parking lot gumbo cooked for 13 hours developed flavors that indoor kitchens couldn't touch. That dark roux, stirred for an hour until it was the color of chocolate, formed the base. Seafood added brininess. Sausage brought smoke and spice. The okra thickened everything into that perfect gumbo consistency. Not quite soup, not quite stew. After all those hours, the flavors had merged completely. You couldn't identify individual ingredients, just layers of rich, spicy, complex deliciousness. The seafood stayed tender. The sausage had released its oils. The vegetables had dissolved into the broth. Spooned over rice, each bite was different but equally good, with that signature gumbo slickness coating your mouth and that slow-building heat that made you reach for more. Number 9. Depression Dirt Cake. Dirt cake earned its name from being barely sweet, incredibly dense, and the color of actual dirt. But that denseness was the point. Made from flour, lard, molasses, and baking soda, it was cake in the technical sense only. The texture was more like very sweet, very heavy bread. The molasses gave it deep, almost burnt sugar flavor with that mineral tang molasses has. Each slice was substantial enough to fill you up, providing calories when calories were scarce. It wasn't delicious in the traditional sense. It was filling, slightly sweet, and dense enough to sustain you. The lard made it rich without being greasy. The molasses provided iron and minerals. This was survival food that happened to be shaped like dessert. Number 10. NASCAR Pit Crew Breakfast Burrito. Those engine block breakfast burritos had a specific flavor profile you couldn't replicate. The tortilla got slightly crispy where it touched the hot metal through the foil. The eggs stayed creamy from the steam trapped inside. The sausage released its grease, soaking into everything. Hash browns absorbed all those flavors while staying slightly firm. Cheese melted perfectly. Hot sauce added kick. After 3 hours on that engine block during warm-up and practice runs, everything had melded together. The burrito held together perfectly. No soggy spots, no dry spots. Each bite delivered protein, carbs, and flavor in perfect balance. The slight metallic tang from the engine somehow made it taste more legit, like it was fuel for racing, not just breakfast. Number 11. Squirrel Dumplings. Squirrel dumplings required patience but delivered incredible flavor. Those squirrels had to boil for hours until the meat fell off the bones. The resulting broth was nutty, literally, from all those acorns squirrels ate. Rich, slightly gamey with a depth chicken broth dreams about. The dumplings dropped into that simmering liquid, puffed up light and tender, absorbing the brothy goodness. The squirrel meat, picked clean and stirred back in, tasted like dark meat chicken, but richer, more interesting. Each spoonful had tender dumpling, flavorful broth, and that distinctive squirrel meat. The nuttiness from the acorns came through in every bite, making it taste like the forest itself had been captured in a pot. Number 12. Possum and sweet taters. Possum meat, properly prepared, was surprisingly mild and tender. That parboiling removed the gamey fat, leaving meat that roasted beautifully with sweet potatoes. The possum had more fat than you'd expect, which rendered into the sweet potatoes, making them incredibly rich. The meat itself tasted like dark pork mixed with something slightly wild, earthy without being overwhelming. The sweet potatoes caramelized in that possum fat, their sweetness balancing the meat's richness. After hours in the Dutch oven, everything was fall-apart tender. The possum pulled into strings. The sweet potatoes were creamy inside with crispy, caramelized edges. Together, they created this sweet-savory combination that made sense despite sounding wrong. Number 13. Hurricane Gumbo. Hurricane Gumbo was necessity cooking that produced restaurant-quality results. Everything going into one pot meant flavors had nowhere to hide. They had to work together. Shrimp that would have spoiled added sweetness and brine. Chicken contributed richness. Sausage brought smoke and spice. Okra thickened it into that perfect consistency. After 14 hours of simmering while the hurricane raged, that gumbo had developed complexity that fast cooking can't achieve. The proteins stayed tender. The vegetables had completely dissolved into flavor. The roux had darkened even more, adding nutty depth. Served in whatever bowls survived, each spoonful was pure survival food elevated to art, rich, complex, slightly spicy, deeply satisfying. Number 14. Crawfish Boil. A proper crawfish boil was about that spicy, salty liquid as much as the crawfish. The water, loaded with cayenne, garlic, onions, and lemons, became a brine that penetrated everything. The crawfish absorbed that spice, their sweet meat contrasting with the heat. The corn soaked up the seasoned water, becoming the best corn you'd ever tasted. Potatoes cooked in that liquid turned into flavor bombs. When everything came out of that pot, it was dripping with spiced liquid, steaming hot, requiring immediate eating with your hands. The crawfish were sweet and tender with that slight spice burn. The corn was salty, sweet perfection. The potatoes were basically crawfish flavored. This was communal eating at its finest. Messy, spicy, social, unforgettable. Number 15. Venison Jerky. The secret to perfect venison jerky was the marinade soak and the slow dehydration. That venison, sliced thin against the grain, soaked for days in soy sauce, brown sugar, liquid smoke, and bourbon. The meat absorbed all those flavors deep into the fibers. During dehydration, the outside developed that slightly crystallized coating from the sugar, while the inside stayed chewy. The bourbon added complexity without being identifiable. The liquid smoke gave it that campfire flavor. The result was jerky that was tender enough to tear, but chewy enough to satisfy, with intense flavor in every bite. Sweet, salty, smoky, with that distinctive venison richness that's darker and more complex than beef jerky. Number 16. Church Tuna Casserole. Tuna casserole was about that creamy interior meeting crunchy topping. The base, tuna, egg noodles, cream of mushroom soup, peas, was basically the same everywhere. The magic happened on top. Potato chips created a salty, crispy layer that stayed crunchy even after baking. Breadcrumbs gave more uniform crunch with less grease. Crushed crackers split the difference. Fried onions added both crunch and flavor. Baked until the edges bubbled and the topping turned golden. Each version had its merits. The casserole underneath was creamy, salty from the tuna, with those peas adding pops of sweetness. The topping provided textural contrast that made each bite interesting. Hot from the oven, this was comfort food that satisfied completely. Number 17. Fried frog legs. Properly fried frog legs were tender, mild, and incredibly delicious. The legs, battered in seasoned flour, hit hot oil and puffed up golden. The meat inside stayed incredibly tender, more tender than chicken, with a texture almost like fish, but firmer. The flavor was subtle, taking on whatever seasoning you used while adding its own delicate taste. Each leg had that satisfying pull when you bit into it, the meat coming clean off the bone. The coating stayed crispy, providing that textural contrast. Served hot with just salt and lemon, frog legs let you taste the delicate meat. The flavor was clean, slightly sweet, nothing fishy or swampy despite where they came from. Number 18. Tobacco Barn Pork. Tobacco Barn Barbecue created pork that was smoky in ways regular smoking couldn't achieve. That low temperature for 36 hours meant the meat absorbed smoke so deeply it colored the fat pink. The pork turned incredibly tender, falling apart at the slightest touch. But it wasn't just smoke flavor, it was Tobacco Barn smoke flavor. Decades of tobacco curing had soaked into those walls, adding something indefinable to the meat. Sweet, slightly floral, with hints of the tobacco leaf, without tasting like tobacco. The fat rendered completely, leaving meat that was tender but not greasy. Each bite was smoky, rich, complex, with that unique flavor profile that came from cooking in a space designed for a completely different purpose. Number 19. Mountain Dew Cake. Mountain Dew Cake was aggressively yellow, extremely sweet, and surprisingly good. The Mountain Dew replaced all liquid in the recipe, adding its citrus flavor and carbonation. The lemon jello mix intensified that citrus note while adding more sweetness and that artificial yellow color. Baked in a bundt pan, the cake came out dense and moist, with tiny air pockets from the carbonation. The flavor hit you immediately, sweet, citrusy, with that distinctive Mountain Dew taste that was somehow more concentrated. The texture was tender, but substantial, not fluffy like regular cake. Each slice was intensely flavored. A little went a long way. This was dessert that didn't apologize for being over-the-top sweet. It was pure sugar and citrus, and that was exactly the point. Number 20. Fried Swamp Cabbage. Fried swamp cabbage transformed hearts of palm into something special. Those thick slices hit the hot bacon grease and started caramelizing, developing golden brown edges while staying tender inside. The bacon added smoke, the onions added sweetness. The hearts of palm had their own subtle flavor somewhere between artichoke and asparagus, but more delicate. The high heat created texture contrast, crispy outside, tender inside, while concentrating the flavors. The bacon grease coated everything, making it rich without being greasy. Each bite had that satisfying crunch giving way to tender vegetable, with bacon, onion, and that distinctive hearts of palm flavor coming through. This was vegetables cooked like meat, hearty and satisfying. Number 21. Roasted groundhog. Groundhog meat, after proper preparation, was tender and flavorful in surprising ways. That parboiling removed the gamey fat, leaving meat that roasted beautifully. The groundhog fat that remained rendered into the vegetables, making them incredibly rich. The meat itself was dark, closer to pork than chicken, with a distinct wild flavor that was earthy without being overwhelming. After hours in the Dutch oven, it fell apart tender. The vegetables had absorbed all those meat juices, turning sweet and savory simultaneously. The meat had a slight chew that reminded you it was wild game, with a richness that came from an animal that had fattened up naturally on grass and vegetables. Each bite was hearty, satisfying, tasting like the best pot roast with a wild edge. Number 22. Fried noodled catfish. Noodled catfish tasted better because of the story, but also because they were the freshest possible fish. Caught that morning by hand, cleaned immediately, and fried within hours, these catfish were sweeter and more tender than anything from a store. The cornmeal coating crisped up golden and crunchy, while the fish inside stayed incredibly moist and flaky. Catfish has a mild, slightly sweet flavor with none of the muddy taste people expect. Properly fried, Each piece was a contrast, crispy coating giving way to tender, flaky fish that pulled apart easily. The meat was white, clean-tasting, with a delicate flavor that didn't need much beyond salt and lemon. The cornmeal added texture and a slight corn sweetness that complemented the fish perfectly. Number 23. Deep-fried turkey. Deep-fried turkey wasn't just faster, it was legitimately better. That hot oil sealed the skin immediately, creating a barrier that kept all the juices inside while getting impossibly crispy. The skin shattered when you bit into it, giving way to the most tender, juicy turkey meat. The high heat cooked the bird in 37 minutes, not enough time for the meat to dry out. Every bite was moist, flavorful, with that crispy skin that regular oven turkey could never achieve. The oil penetrated just enough to add richness without making it greasy. The turkey tasted fried but not oily, crispy but not dry, juicy but not bland. This was turkey that made you question why anyone bothered with ovens. Number 24. Maple glazed salmon. Maple syrup on salmon created a glaze that caramelized beautifully over open fire. The syrup, heated and reduced slightly, formed a sticky coating on the fish. Over the fire, it caramelized into a sweet, crispy crust, while the salmon inside stayed tender and flaky. The maple sweetness balanced the salmon's richness, creating a sweet-savory combination that made sense despite sounding wrong. The smoke from the fire added another layer of flavor. Each bite had that caramelized maple crust giving way to tender, flaky salmon that had absorbed smoke and sweetness. The fish's natural oils mixed with the maple syrup, creating a glaze that was part syrup, part fish fat, entirely delicious. This was surf and turf simplified, just fish and tree sap making magic. Number 25. Ramp burgers. Ramp burgers were an assault on the senses in the best way. Those wild onions, chopped and mixed into the ground beef, pervaded everything. Cooked on the grill, the ramps softened and caramelized slightly while their pungent oils spread through the meat. Each bite delivered that intense ramp flavor, garlic, onion, and something wild all at once. The beef couldn't compete. The ramps dominated completely. The flavor was aggressive, lingering, coating your mouth and throat with that unmistakable ramp funk. But if you loved ramps, this was perfect. The burger is juicy, packed with flavor, impossible to ignore. That ramp taste stayed with you for days, a reminder of what you'd eaten. This wasn't subtle food. This was flavor cranked to maximum, no apologies given. From turtle pies to engine block cooking, from hurricane gumbo to deep-fried turkeys, these 25 meals prove that redneck cooking was about understanding ingredients, maximizing flavor, and making do with what you had. These weren't recipes from culinary schools. They were born from necessity, perfected through practice, and passed down because they worked. The next time someone questions country cooking, remember, these folks turned possums into roasts, snakes into chili, and car engines into cooking equipment. That's not just creativity. That's genius with a side of questionable judgment and absolutely delicious results. Subscribe now for more wild food history, untold kitchen hacks, and stories that prove the best cooking doesn't come from textbooks. It comes from grit, hunger, and a little reckless creativity. Hit subscribe, because this kind of genius shouldn't stay buried in the backwoods.